Hi there, this is Shauna from the Foil Fox. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have two projects that kind of relate to one another. They're these wonderful winter scenes, and I have done them in two different techniques, so hang in there with me. Well, I'll start out by showing you the stamps. This one is Landscape by Penny Black. It is their newest one, and then they had one that they had last year, which is Gorgeous Grove, which is also wonderful. And then some of my favorites, which is Nature's Friends. It has these wonderful animals and tree. I'm going to be using the tree in this one. And then if you'll see in one of the cards I use deer. Those are darling deer if you would rather use those. Or there's Nature's Friends that you can cut out. You can use those as well. So there's different ones you can use. And then Jolly Snippets for some wonderful sentiments and that are just a really nice addition. I'm going to show you the differences between these two. This is the landscape one. This one is about 6 inches wide, where this one is about 4 1/4 to 4 1/2, and it has similar trees to it. This one, the Gorgeous Grove, has a little bit more of a flat ground, where this one has a little bit more hilly. And you can see I was measuring there. They're about 6 compared to 4 1/4 to 4 1/2. So you can really use either one or both, like I did. Now I have a piece of watercolor paper. This is 6 3/4 by 4 1/2. And then I have a piece of Bristol paper, which is a little bit smaller. It's 4 1/2 by 6. I'm going to be using the Bristol paper for the Gorgeous Grove and the watercolor for the landscape. I'm going to be using some archival inks. Of course, my fave, which is VersaFine Black Onyx. And then I have some VersaClair ones. I'm using gray and a brown, possibly a brown, and a green. There's also these Tim Holtz kits that have the gray and have different colors in it that you can use. You don't have to use the VersaClair, but you do need an archival, a waterproof ink. There are also Wendy Vecchi has one too, and I will put those all in our in the supply list, which you can click the link down below. Now I'm mounting my watercolor paper. This is hot press Fabriano, and I mounted in there. I put a little bit of repositionable tape on it just to hold it, plus my magnets, and then I have this landscape stamp situated into my stamp positioner. And I have it so that I have enough hills. You can see the hills. I want those in the right area. But I'm going to just very, very, very lightly use my black onyx ink and just put that little horizon line. I don't want to put anything else right now. I have some Eclipse paper, which is a masking paper, sticky on one side with low tack. And I'm going to then stamp that horizon line there because I want to create this mask. So I'm going to cut this out and then lay it over the top there just to get that idea of how that's going to work. So I'm going to set that aside for now, and I want to do the sky. That's why I wanted to know where the horizon is. So I have a few distress inks. I have Stormy Sky and Chip Sapphire, and I have it. I'm now moistening that, just the sky, nothing else. I moistened with clear water. Now I'm loosening up a mixture of Stormy Sky and Chip Sapphire. The Chip Sapphire I use more along the bottom there on the horizon line and along the edges. But I do mix them up, and you can see it's very, very watery because I don't want it to grab. I just want a light sky in there. And I know it kind of looks weird, but you'll see that it'll turn out just fine once we start getting the trees in there. Now I'm going to dry it really, 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 really well. I want that completely dry before I go on to the next step. Now I'm going to take this, I'm using a gray here. Again, this is Morning Mist, but there are lots of grays. I have them listed in the supply list that you can use. The The only thing you need is it to be waterproof, because we are going to be using water on this panel and you don't want it to get all blurry. So I like the gray. Now see, when it's really pale like that, I really like that. But because I'm going to put some trees behind it, I need it a little bit darker. But you could just stop here and just have these wonderful gray hill trees, and they're wonderful. And I use a little bit of the VersaFine black too. That's why I have the large ink pad and the cube, because at the cube I can just really get in there. So I put some down at the bottom of the trunks of the trees, a little bit where those hilly parts are, but I'm mostly using the gray. And you can see off to the right where there's like a rock or a hill or something, very lightly inking that, because I don't want to get too much ink on there, and I'll show you why in just a few minutes. But now I'm going to dry this really well. The one thing about archival or waterproof ink is that it has a long open time. So before you go further, make sure you dry it, because it can smudge otherwise. It won't smudge a bit once it's dry, but you got to get it dry. So I'm going to use, there's a green in here. You can see there's an archival green in one of those packs from Tim Holtz, again in the supply list. Or you can use peeled paint. I'm using, I think, Shady Lane here. It's a Versaclear one. But I have used one of the trees from Nature's Friend. And I'm being very careful here. I don't want to over ink it, so I'll put a little bit of ink, and I'd rather stamp it a couple of times than not get it right and get too much on there the first time. So now I've stamped it a second time without inking it, decided it needed a little bit more so I inked it again, but lightly. Now I'm going to stamp it again, not putting any ink on there, and just giving it these little so I'm creating depth with these trees. I'm making some a little bit lighter and some a little bit darker, just by using a secondary stamping or just very, very lightly stamping. So when you stamp it the second time, you see you get kind of a halo effect, or a much paler version of your tree. And that's why I want a mixture of these. I also want a break in the middle. I don't want to go trees all straight across. Now right now it looks like the trees are going way into the scene, but you'll see when we peel off the mask that they're not there. And that's the great with the mask. I'm just protecting that area for right now. This is the same tree. I'm just moving it around, and some of them I'm going to stamp light, and some of them I'm going to stamp dark, just trying to give some depth there. And then you can see there are my trees. I think that turned out really nice. Then I take my pencil. I use my pencil a lot. Now this rock, Mimi a la carte, I don't know if you follow her on Facebook. She's wonderful. She had a brilliant idea with this rock. You can just leave it as the rock or hill or rocky hill, whatever you want to call it. But she made a little cabin or a house out of it. And you know, I'm not much of an artist, freeform, but this was really easy to just kind of reshape that kind of rocky hill into a little, you can call it a cabin, or you can call it your house or a barn or whatever you'd like. But I'm making it into this little structure. And I'm using now a Micron Pigma pen, which is waterproof, and I'm just sketching in that, giving it more definition and coloring in a little bit in a sketchy way, adding a window and a door, actually 2 windows, and I'm just giving structure to this house that once was a rock. And I really, really like that idea. Now I'm using my pencil, adding a little bit of a pathway. And I love using my pencil. This is a very soft leaded pencil. And I like using that. It's similar to like a graphite, but not quite there. Then I took this boy with him pulling his dog on his sled, which is so adorable. This is from Spread Cheer. I love this stamp set. It has wonderful birds and other things in it, but it has this great little boy. And I'm using VersaFine Black Onyx ink here, and I'm really inking it. So I get a solid black. He is a silhouette, so you want to get it really, really dark. And now that he's dry, because again, remember that they smudge, I'm just adding in a few lines of tracks where the sled would have been and some little marks with my pencil with where his feet are making an impression in the snow. And I'm just lightly using a pencil there. I'm going to leave it there, but then go over it. I'm using the my paints again. I'm using a little bit of that stormy sky, and I'll use some salty ocean and some chipped sapphire, and I'm going to mix that up in a really watery fashion and paint it in. I'm using my pencil again if I want it a little bit darkened. I find that I have great control with my pencil, so I use that a lot as long as it doesn't show too much. And now I'm just taking these little bits of this mixture of gray and blues, and I'm adding in a little bit of shadow in the hillside, by the trees. You know, I have this the stamp has that little rocky area. Then we're going to put in the tracks for the sled, and then for the little boy where he's making an impression in the snow. And I'm using, I have a facial tissue in my one hand, so I can dab it off really quickly if I want to. You know, you can always add, but you can't take away very well. So I add very slowly when I do these things, because I don't want to go all my work to go to waste by one little false move. So I'm adding in a little bit of snowbank there, just a little bit of definition to my snow. And I think that I'm pretty much done. I'm going to add a little bit more detail with the path. And again, these are the combination of inks that I'm using, just darkening that a little bit, following those pencil lines. And now I'm using my Dr. P.H. Martin Bleed Proof White ink. And I am going to put a little bit of it there. Use my paintbrush. I'm going to add a snowy roof to my little house or barn or whatever you want to call it. And it does add a little more dimension to the structure there. It looks like it has it's more 3D. Then I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of that right where, you know, the snow is going to kick up a little bit with your feet and with the sled. So I add some splatters of white ink there. Plus I'm going to add a little bit more on the ground. I'm going to add some around the trees, all the trees, and just kind of wherever it seems appropriate, I'm going to add little clumps of snow using this white ink. I love this white ink. It's very opaque, and it gives you a really nice snowy appearance. So I just, you know, I always have to fiddle, so that's what I'm doing. And just going to add just a teens more around the trees. And once I have this all done, I'm going to make sure it's very, very dry, and I'm going to stamp a sentiment. I'm using the Jolly Snippets, which is it has so many wonderful sentiments there. I'm using my VersaFine ink, black ink again, and I'm very lightly kind of kissing the paper with that. Don't want to get too heavy-handed. I don't want it to blur. I just want just a simple little sentiment there. Now I have a card base. It's the same size when folded of my card front, which you remember is I think 6 3/4 by 4.5. I'm going to make sure that my glue goes all the way to the edge because I don't want it lifting up. And then I will glue it to the front of my card base, and that's going to finish this card. And I love nature scenes, particularly snow scenes, and so this one was a real favorite of mine. But there's another one that I wanted to show you really quickly, and I hope you hang in there to see this one. This is a little bit different technique. We're using Gorgeous Grove, and then I'm just recapping. These are the animals that you can use the nature's friends, either stamp them or cut them out. You see the die there, and there's also Darling Deer from Sizzix. Just showing you some different deer, but any deer or any woodland creature you want to put in would be fabulous for this. I have a piece of Bristol paper. This is 4.5 by 6. And I have the gray scale Tombow pens. And I have some browns and I have a light blue along with some tumbled glass, some salty ocean, and pumice stone. And some chipped sapphire. I'm going to start out by using a gray Tombow pen, kind of a medium gray, and I'm going to just color the trees. I'm just coloring the trees. This is the advantage of this set. Now you saw I just spritzed that really quickly, and sometimes I will spritz it to kind of loosen it up and then go back over it to give it a little bit of crispness and stamp it again. Now, the huge advantage of this technique is that you can add color, and you can add kind of spot color wherever you would like it. And, I could have stamped, excuse me, these trees with archival ink, but I wanted to have a little bit of gray, a little bit of black, and I have so much more control when I use Tombow pens. So I'm just going to go back over these trees periodically, just until I get the crispness that I want. Now I'm using a light blue Tombow pen, and I'm just putting in that horizon, and you'll see that there's kind of those little speckly ground, which I really like. It gives it really nice texture. And this is one of the big advantages of the Tombow pen too. I'm using a really light gray here that I took out of that pack of grayscale. And I'm adding that a little bit with this light blue too. But you can see I can add this blue and this gray. It's not all a silhouette. You could do it all in silhouette. You could do it all black or all gray if you wanted and use archival ink. But this is the huge advantage of using Tombow pens. You can go in, they're watercolor pens that respond very well to blending. But they also work really well for this, to just go in and color those bits you want colored. That means that if there's something you don't want colored, you just don't color it and stamp away and it's not there. And I really like that. And so I put the ground in there, and now I'm going to take again another piece of this Eclipse paper. This is the masking paper, and I just stamped, I'm going to just color that horizon line again. And I'm going to cut off the horizon line very much like the last project I just did. But this time I'm going to use a blending dome with a blending tool. And I'm going to start out with, I'm going to have a sunset in there. And so I'm using a little bit of antique linen and a little bit of wild honey, and then I'm going to finish off with barn door. Let me rephrase that. I actually use squeezed lemonade here. So it's squeezed lemonade, wild honey as it gets a little bit darker, and then the really dark portion is just the tiniest bit of barn door. Those are distress inks. And then now I'm using tumbled glass, again stress inks, and I'm using the blending tool again, and I'm just putting in some light blue. Now you've seen this technique. I know before, if you watch Jill Foster at Penny Black. And I just fall in love with it. It works really, really well. And it is a fast way to put some color in. And now I'm going to move on to a little bit darker color, the Salty Ocean. Put that just around the edges, still leaving some of that lighter, so I have kind of a glow around the sunset or sunrise, however you want to think of it. And then I'm using a bit of Chip Sapphire as I around the edges. I let it get darker, and this is from Chip Sapphire, again, another distress ink. And then you see I have this great sun, and then I have a blue sky. And I'm taking my blending brush again and just, or really, you can use a blending brush. This is a blending tool, and adding just a little bit of wild honey. And you can see I'm in a little tiny bit of the barn door. I do blot it onto my work surface first so it doesn't grab and I don't have this big blob on my paper. Now I'm going to go back through my and just sharpen up my trees again with a gray Tombow. And then I'm going to sharpen up the ground a little bit. I'm using a light gray here and adding just a little bit of that ground. It's just mainly just sharpening up all of these features to this wonderful, wonderful stamp. And again, you can think about how I showed that technique before where I used watercolor and archival inks. You could do that to this one just as easily, or you can do it this way and just use some distress inks or some different inks that you really like to use. So I'm just going back now with a very damp brush and a little bit of that light blue color. I scribbled it from the Tombow pen onto my work surface, and then I'm just kind of blending that area a little bit. Now I want that kind of pebbly look to go a little bit further down, and so I'm going to cover up this part just with a piece of paper, move my stamp. Now don't move your stamp until you are really sure you're finished with those trees, because you'll never get them back in the right position again. I wiped off my stamp because I don't want to be fiddling around with it and putting it in different places until its final resting place, until I'm ready to stamp. So do clean it off until you get it to the right place. And now I'm using the light blue again and the gray. And I'm using my damp brush again, and I'm just kind of spreading that around just to kind of give it, not losing the pebbly look, but just blending it just ever so slightly. And of course I have to do a lot of fiddling. So once that's done, these are the Darling Deer, and I colored them with some antique linen and some vintage photo distress inks. I cut them out and I colored them off camera, and now I'm going to use them. But first I'm going to put some snow down using my my Dr. P.H. Martin bleed proof ink again, and I'm just splattering around, plus adding more around the trees, just wherever it will gather, the snow can gather. I'm just going to add that in and just splatter some more. It just depends how snowy of a you would like it. And now I'm going to just splatter these deer just a tiny bit. Now this is really dry. You didn't see the drying, but it is very dry. Before I do this, I put the glue all on the edges just like before. Have a folded card base, white card base, stuck that on because we're going to cover the entire front. And now I'm going to glue down and smear this around so I get it all the way around, and don't have too much on there. And I'm going to stick down these adorable deer. I just love them. I love putting woodland creatures in my winter scenes. I think they work out so nicely. Now there's my card. Now I could put a sentiment by using Jolly Snippets, but I decided not to. So here it is, with a wonderful sunrise or sunset, whatever you want to term it. I'm in love with the deer in that one, and then this one is wonderful with the boy and his dog. It's great too, and I love Mimi's idea of making that into a little house. I hope you enjoyed this video and you hung in there and saw the different techniques. I hope you give them a try. Here's a list of the few things I used: the landscape, the gorgeous grove, the nature's friends, the darling deer. But you can see everything that I used in the supply list. Just click the link down below. I hope if you did enjoy it that you give us a thumbs up, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.